So one of the unique things I look back on was in my academy days, 1976, that on a Saturday, and I don't believe they do this anymore, but you went to Universal Studios. And at Universal Studios, we had the back lot all to ourselves, and it was designed for officer survival. And because they have all the sets, the streets, you can actually do vehicle pursuits, they have buildings, and all the different stuff you've seen in all the movies is on location there. And at the time, then, LAPD SWAT, and I kind of knew about them. That's where I wanted to go from day one in the academy. But they had about 4 or 5 SWAT officers who would debrief different officer-involved shootings. And they sat you down. We had our whole academy class, but we're on the steps of one of the buildings at the back lot at Universal Studios. Ron McCarthy is in there. I know I'm in there. And it's all of us, and you have these gray sweatsuit on. We didn't have fancy stuff back then. A lot of us had just the, just regular Converse tennis sneakers. They didn't have fancy running shoes and all this garbage you have today. And they would come out, and each LAPD SWAT officer had a storyboard. And on that storyboard were multiple photographs of officer-involved shootings involving LAPD officers. And in some cases, what they had were actual audio transcripts. They played a tape recording of an actual officer-involved shooting. And for instance, they would start going through the shootings. I don't remember any of them except for one, and I'll explain that in a minute. But they would go through the shooting, and they had storyboards, and they showed the crime scene, and you saw the blood. You saw the officer's revolver on the deck. You saw suspects, you saw, that were down and so forth. And the SWAT officer would say, the words you're about to hear are the last words this LAPD officer ever said in his lifetime. Because after this, he was dead. And it really made an impact. And one of them was the very famous Lemus and Robert's shooting at Montclair and Adams. And that's where 2 LAPD officers confronted, I believe it was 4 suspects, all armed with semi-automatic handguns, that shot both Lemus and Robert multiple times before the officers ever got into the fight. They returned fire, subsequently neutralizing 3 of the suspects. I think they wounded a 4th one who was later apprehended. But you really got a sense of, oh my God, this is real. In other words, everything else is theoretical up until then. You go through the academy, this is how you're supposed to do a pursuit, this is how you handle suspects. Now we're getting the nitty-gritty. We have photographs, we have actual officers on a tape recording who are, pleading for their lives, asking for help. You can hear the gunshots in the background. And it was at that point where I realized that not only did I have to stay in shape and work out all the time, I had to up my game in terms of marksmanship, in terms of tactics, communication. I mean, all the different things which encompass being a righteous, solid street police officer. I realized that this is a different world. And this is well before you graduate from the academy. I think it was probably about 3/4 of the way through. One of the lessons that I learned at Universal Studios that day, and I know they had a barricaded suspect, they had a pursuit, a vehicle pursuit, they had a building search, they had vehicle ambush. So you would go to a different location, a different SWAT officer would be in charge of the entire thing. We didn't have Sims back then. We didn't have paintball. None of that was around. This is 76. So you had blanks. So if you got close to the officer, he'd shoot you with a blank, and you could definitely feel it even through your little sweatsuit that had your name on it. Like I had Reitz S or whatever, 21725 serial number. But the one that I remember very distinctly was a vehicle pursuit. I'm chasing the car. We're in black and whites, but we're in the back lots, and I'm chasing this vehicle, and it's and they come out with these fake broadcasts on Simplex or whatever it was back then, and chasing and everything else, and finally stop them. And when I stop them, we get 2 guys out, and the first guy goes, well, this guy, the passenger gets out, and it was Frank Micah, who ultimately was going to be my partner in SWAT. I had no idea at the time. He was also the first police officer, and I've mentioned him before, if you go back into being basically a creative police officer, that was Frank Micah. I had no idea who he was. And he gets out and he's going, oh my God, this guy took me hostage, blah, 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 please help me, please help me. And I fell into it. And so he's a passenger officer. I get him out. My partner, I have no idea who it was at the time in the academy, gets the driver out. We don't really go along with a felony prone like you should. And I'm very sympathetic toward Frank going, oh my God, this guy was a victim. And the next thing I go, I have a 2-inch to my head. And I went, oh my God. Oh my God. And that's when I realized you never assume a single thing. And that was a great lesson. And you learn a lot of lessons throughout the day, but building searches and everything else. They don't do it anymore. I don't think we have access to Universal Studios backlot. But for me, it was very visceral because you're listening to real guys who have been really out in the street, who've been in real shootings, who've been around deadly force application, who understand the implications of not having your stuff wired together tight, not understanding what it is that you're supposed to accomplish or how you're supposed to accomplish it, not understanding all the different nuances that go into the extemporaneous nature of police work. And it was, after that day, I think it was the most impactful day I had in my entire academy. I think it was for all of us at the time, because you realize this is not a joke anymore. It's not Dragnet, it's not Adam 12, this is real. And if you make a mistake, this is how you're going to pay for it. The only funny thing that came out of that day, on that Saturday, was that, and oh, by the way, years later, I would be one of the officers actually running that when I was in D team. I would, not running it, but I would actually handle, one of the scenarios. I can't remember what it was, doesn't really matter. Teaching recruits. And I would always remember in the back of my mind when I was a recruit, what I learned and the impact that it had on me. Well, on this particular day, when we're doing this, we're in our gray sweatsuit, we're all standing around. There were like 40, I think there were 41 of us in my class. And Universal Studios at the time still had the tour bus coming through. Now, you have to understand that the tour bus has all these tourists from all over the world, Omaha, Nebraska, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And you have, they have like 4 trains on this stuff, stuffed with these tourists. She looks over and we're all in our little stupid gray sweatsuits, and there's a picture that accompanied it. If you go back to it, we're going to show you. And she looks over and she goes, ladies and gentlemen, to your right is the real LAPD SWAT team. And I like, oh my fucking God. Really? I didn't say anything. I knew it was coming. And the entire train that goes through, everybody starts clapping, way to go, taking pictures and everything else. And they turn, they go down the street about 100 yards, turn the corner, they're gone. The instructors turned around to us, and boy, did they make us pay. I think for about a half an hour, we had to do what are called burpees, which is, you're standing at attention, you go down, you thrust your legs out, you do a push-up, legs spread, do a push-up, bring them back, do a push-up, stand back up for about half an hour for taking undue credit for being LAPD SWAT when we hadn't even graduated from the academy. And I'll tell you, it was, for half an hour, it was absolutely brutal. And you know what? We deserve it. Thank you, tourists, whoever you were in 1976, and especially you, whoever was the narrator on that bus, for saying that we were LAPD SWAT when we were still green-faced novices in the academy. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate that.